All right, everyone, welcome back. We've made it through the fallibilism chapter and the well-being chapter, two incredibly important concepts in Pangburn philosophy. Fallibilism being the necessary constraint on epistemology, in that in order for you to have a sound epistemology, a good epistemology in my view, a good way of discerning knowledge, you must always be open for correction or update. Defeasibility. There is no exception for this rule. The logical absolutes don't get an exception. Your God belief doesn't get an exception. You must always be open to the fact that you, in fact, by your nature, are fallible, regardless of whether you want to accept that or not. And it is a trait of ours that should be held up as a high virtue and promoted. This is the elimination, the annihilator of dogmatism. Dogmatism being things that are believed incontrovertibly. That means that people believe that they believe something so strong that there's nothing could come along and possibly overturn that belief or demonstrate it to be incorrect for some reason. So, fallibilism, necessary constraint on epistemology. And then we finished up on the well-being chapter last week, which is my necessary constraint on ethics. In order to be living the good life, your ethical framework, your morality must at least be maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you. And by well-being, I simply mean physical, mental, and social health. If your moral outlook and ethical framework doesn't take into consideration human health, then we have a problem. It must in order to be good. So, putting a constraint on epistemology and ethics is a massive step. And then the question is, where do we go from there? Well, as social apes, it feels natural to me to address the thing that makes us social apes, and that is communication. The third Pangburn virtue is communication, and the corresponding Pangburnian maxim is that good faith and helpfulness are the minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic. A dialectic is the art of discussing, sometimes, but doesn't always have to be, disagreements regarding the beliefs and positions related to propositions. But in a more contemporary, today sense, the dialectic can also be synonymized to some degree with discussion or a conversation. So, good faith and helpfulness are the minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic. What I mean by good faith are things that relate to sincerity of intentions. And we're going to get into a great deal on all of this, but being sincere with your intentions. And it's amazing how many aspects of the human condition that really does touch. So we will get into a lot about good faithness. And then helpfulness. What does it mean to be helpful with regards to communication? we will talk a lot about that today. This is a big one, considering we all exist here in the Pangburn universe, governed by this particular communication maxim. And we've seen it play out over the last 5, 6 years, maybe 7 years now. And there are a lot of insights that have been born of this, watching people struggle to maintain good faithness, to maintain sincerity with their community and themselves. And probably even more difficult for those who actually really do want to be here and think honesty is important. Helpfulness. How do we stay helpful when confronting and engaging with ideas that we detest? And in saying that, we're going to start seeing a lot of overlap and reference to the first two Pangburn virtues and how communication relates to them. But I want to, of course, welcome back Thomas and Perry, two great philosophers here in the Pangburn universe. I value their opinions so much as we work through what I hope to be a great work, and that is my first book, Pangburn Philosophy, the Six Virtues and Maxims. Thomas and Perry, how are you guys doing today?
Amazing. What up, Pito?
My being as well. Thank you for asking.
I love it. Yes, me too.
The cult process is working. They're using the language.
Good. We've indoctrinated everyone. Great. All right, continue.
Fantastic. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's not enough substance really has been said, but you're right. It is difficult to remain helpful in communication, as we've seen many times. But we'll get more into it. So let's do it.
Yeah, this stuff is not easy. This particular one really does get to the day-to-day of us as social apes interacting with our entire experience. And because good faith and helpfulness also relates to how you must communicate with yourself in order to bear fruit. So you don't really escape communication as a human being. It's always there. But let's get into this, shall we? As always, we will start with some reading. Communication, the human condition of communication. Human beings do not encounter the world alone. Almost everything we believe, understand, or act upon arrives through other people. Language is the medium through which knowledge is shared, norms are transmitted, identities are negotiated, and conflicts are either resolved or entrenched. Communication is not a secondary feature of human life. It is the environment in which human life unfolds. And yet, communication is fragile. People speak from different histories, different fears, different incentives, and different levels of psychological and social safety. Words are filtered through emotion before they are processed by reason. Tone often matters more than content. Status and power distort how messages are received. Misunderstanding is not the exception. It is the default. Most moral and epistemic failures do not begin with ignorance. They begin with breakdowns in communication. People talk past one another, at one another, or about one another, but rarely, I say, with one another. The Pangburn Communication Project begins here, in this reality, rather than a idealized vision of rational discourse. It does not assume good intentions, it does not assume equal footing, and it does not assume that truth will surface automatically if people are simply allowed to speak. Communication, like inquiry and well-being, requires constraint to function. Human nervous systems are not built for constant confrontation. Prolonged exposure to hostility increases stress and reduces cognitive flexibility. In such states, people become less capable of understanding opposing views, even when those views are articulated clearly. What looks like stubbornness is often dysregulation. What looks like malice is often threat response. At the same time, silence is not neutral. When communication collapses, power often fills that vacuum. Those who are loud, confident, or institutionally protected dominate the narrative. Others withdraw, disengage, or radicalize elsewhere. The quality of communication, therefore, shapes not only what is said, but who remains in the conversation at all. This is why Pangburnian communication begins as a moral concern, not merely a social one. How people speak to each other determines whether disagreement produces understanding or damage. It determines whether knowledge is refined or weaponized. It determines whether communities remain capable of self-correction or slide into factionalism. The human condition of communication is therefore one of tension. People need to speak. They need to be heard. They need to challenge and be challenged. But they do so with limited patience, imperfect regulation, and unequal power. Pangburnian communication is something that must be stewarded, not merely exercised. The question is not whether people are allowed to speak. The question is whether the way they speak predictably increases understanding, trust, and collective problem solving, or whether it degrades those conditions over time. That is the human condition in which the Pangburn communication maxim emerges. Not in ideal discourse, not in perfect sincerity, but in fragile conversations under pressure where the cost of failure is real. Okay, there's a lot there. Something to keep in mind before we bring Thomas and Perry in after this introductory section. The Pangburn virtues and maxims all work in synthesis. Even though we are working through the book chapter by chapter, these are detailed introductions to the virtues themselves and the maxim, and some important information to go along with them. But when we're communicating, for example, fighting for fruitfulness in a good faith, helpful way, we cannot forget our fallibilism, which is our epistemic constraint. And we, of course, cannot forget about the good life, well-being, our ethical constraint. What it means to communicate with someone from a well-being perspective when we're trying to maximize well-being for ourselves and those around us. This must be considered. So, Thomas, Perry, what do you guys think of the human condition of communication? Did we hit all of the important points here? Is there something else you'd like to add?
I would like to play off Perry on this one. Please go, Perry.
Sure. Yeah, it's good that we consistently bring up the constraints that we have as fallible apes. If you don't base your communication on the real world, on reality, you end up with, Hegelianism. And you communicate in a way that's based on these just webs of coherent and rational structures, even if they don't correspond to reality. One thing also on tone. Sometimes you do have to tone police yourself, even if, and I only say this because I find myself in this position often where people have these threat responses to my tone and they think I'm speaking in bad faith or I'm being unhelpful, even if my words are clear. So I'm often an unwise steward and not being, meta aware of my tone. Even now I'm kind of speaking in a monotone, robotic voice, as Don likes to call it.
But it's interesting, Perry, because of what you are saying, it comes across as hyper genuine and thoughtful. But yes,
Sure.
if
I
you're
agree entirely with that.
under this same tone, if you're, responding to someone's, let's say, legal trial they just lost, this could come off as insensitive because I'm not hearing and I'm not interpreting the importantness through your tone, even though you're saying the right things or you're just expressing your opinion. I'm not feeling what I want to be feeling from the way you are saying what you are saying.
And I think that's part of stewardship, is understanding the context and having a little bit of empathy and consideration for your interlocutor, whom you are communicating with. That's a big part of it, whether it's necessary or not, that's up for debate. But, context is certainly important, and being genuine is important. And I find myself in a constant, battle trying to be genuine while also, are you okay? I don't want to artificialize my tone in such a way that comes off as patronizing and disingenuous. So,
right.
So yeah.
I absolutely love that. Now I'm going to go meta. Communication. I can lens communication through the idea of attachment theory and extrapolate that to humanity. And we can say, without using language as an instrument to communicate and sound and all that kind of stuff, we would be dead. we would be dead. So it is a necessary for human connection. Can you still hear me? My green light's not coming on.
Yes,
okay, cool,
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a necessary for human connection, but it's also a necessary for human survival. And that's why I look at it through the lens of attachment theory, because it all comes down to, well, if we can't work together and we disagree, we are going to slowly die in metaphorical ways and literal ways, all kinds of things. We just map this onto evolution. It's easy to see. It's not an absolute thing, but it is a pattern. And evolutionary psychology does say some stuff on this, but that's not absolute either. Of course.
Well, and we will get to the cognition and
yes, of course.
section.
Regardless, communication. Yeah, exactly. Communication itself, though, is about disagreement and repair. Because if there is no repair after disagreement from anybody, between governments, between people, then survival goes down, well-being goes down, everything. All of the metrics that we would use, that we would care about for well-being, go down when repair is not sought. I mean, this is the whole reason why countries have foreign policy and diplomatic departments and all that kind of stuff. I don't know the fucking terminology, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up an important point, like in the lens of the state, how important it is to be cognizant of the well-being outcomes of how we communicate what is going on and
big time,
and what direction we're moving in. You can do so much damage with a very loud microphone.
So much. Yeah, rhetoric is very poisonous in many ways if it's used improperly, and it is all the time. Go ahead.
And one thing that should be clear by the time we get through this chapter, if it's not already clear, is that if you are someone that is looking to enact the good life, to do good in the world, look at your communication. You communicate all day, every day. Sometimes just with yourself, if you're alone. But this is a thing that is happening to us all day, every day. And the reason why I say that is just imagine and look at the potential of how much more good and how much more we can maximize that good if we really focus on how we are communicating and bringing attention to the things that give us much greater opportunity to bear fruit in our communications. Every human being of sound mind wants to bear fruit out of their communications. Or to put it a different way, to have something good, by whatever their standards of good are, come out of those communications. Again, whether it's with yourself or with others. But think very deeply and wide. Imagine the landscape of where your communication touches. It touches yourself, it touches your partner, it touches your children, it touches your community. When you're in the grocery store, when you're ordering food, when you're receiving your food at a restaurant, we're going to get into the subcategories of communication because I always include 3 subcategories for every virtue and maxim. But it's not only about the words you use or the way you use those words. It's also about body language. How we communicate with our bodies, our faces. So it may seem like it's a lot to ask, to demand as a constraint on communication, at least good faith and helpfulness. But I'll say to you that you already do this to some degree, at some level with some people or yourself. I'm simply asking you to pay attention to when you are engaging in a good faith, helpful way, and see if expanding that can cause you to bear more fruit in your relationships. So let's move on to the next section, and we're going to get into the isness of all of this, which is what communication is and is not. And for Thomas and Perry, we're going to focus on what communication is and is not, the isness of this. Communication is often treated as the mere transmission of information. Words are spoken, signals are sent, messages are received. If misunderstanding occurs, it is assumed to be a technical failure or a matter of insufficient clarity. This picture is neat, but it's also wrong. Communication is not the movement of propositions from one mind to another. It is a joint activity that occurs between people under conditions of uncertainty, asymmetry, and constraint. Meaning is negotiated, not delivered. Understanding is constructed, not uploaded. This is why people can hear the same words and walk away with radically different interpretations. Language does not arrive in a vacuum. It arrives filtered through emotion, memory, expectation, power dynamics, and trust. What is said matters. Who says it, when, how, and in what context often matters more. Pangburnian communication therefore begins by rejecting the fantasy of frictionless exchange. There is no such thing as content without context. There is no such thing as neutral tone. There is no such thing as communication without consequence. Every exchange shapes the conditions of future exchange, either widening or narrowing what can be said. This also clarifies what communication is not. It is not performance. Communication aimed at signaling intelligence, loyalty, or moral superiority may succeed theatrically while failing communicatively. So those things are still a form of communication. But is this the kind of communication we want to crown as king? When the goal is winning rather than understanding, the conversation has already ended, even if the words continue. It is not mere persuasion. Persuasion treats the other person as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a collaborator in sense-making. Pangburnian communication is oriented toward mutually intelligibility, not conquest. And it is not silence masquerading as neutrality. Withholding speech can be prudent. It can also function as avoidance, abdication, or quiet coercion. Whether silence serves well-being depends on its effects, not just its justification. What communication is, instead, is a form of shared problem solving. Even when disagreement is sharp, communication succeeds when participants become better able to understand the structure of the disagreement itself. Clarity is progress, even when consensus is not reached. This reframes disagreement as a cooperative act rather than a hostile one. The goal is not to eliminate difference, but to reduce confusion and necessary harm. A conversation can fail even if one side is factually correct, and it can succeed even when no agreement is achieved. The Pangburn communication maxim will later formalize this orientation. For now, the essential point is this: communication is judged not by how forcefully one speaks, but by what the exchange reliably produces over time. Communication that expands understanding, preserves trust, and keeps people in the conversation is doing moral work. Communication that narrows understanding, erodes trust, and drives people out is not. Okay, Perry and Thomas, what do you think on what communication is?
I remember.
Go ahead, Barry, please. Go ahead.
I remember being in the call-in days and being fascinated with a thought that I had, which is, it's amazing that we can understand each other through mere sounds and symbols. Just whether that be reading the symbols, the little squiggles that you get on your phone, and you laugh at it because you understand it, or what you're hearing your interlocutor say. And so that always fascinated me. And there is quite a bit of moral work to be done. You never want a conversation. I won't get too much in the shoulds. I know we were just talking about what it is descriptively, but no, it is a moral task to not be asymmetric in your conversation. When you come to a disagreement, you don't want to resort to the loud rhetoric, attractive sounding rhetoric. You want to understand the disagreement cooperatively, not antagonistically. It's not like a battle.
And that's why I think it's important to reframe disagreement as a cooperative act. It's really hard to do that because the emotional knee-jerk reaction to disagreement is to get ready to fight at some level.
Yeah.
Fight for the truth, the way you see it.
Yeah, it gets, it kind of goes back maybe to the threat response type of thing, and the sentiments that you have toward a certain position, and when you're arguing for it and you hear someone go against that idea of yours, which is so heavily emotional for you, it becomes difficult to not have that knee-jerk emotional reaction and to be truly stoic. What was I going to say? We give a lot of shit to Jordan Peterson. Well, what do you mean by the, right? Yeah. And just ridiculous. But that can be very helpful in a disagreement to make sure that we have common, cooperative, common ground on what we mean by a certain word.
Yeah, if it's something like that, clarifying, conceptual usage, meaning if it's being done in a non-sophistic way, that should come across. However, if there is the deep embeddedness of sophistry there, then that's when people get frustrated, and maybe sometimes Jordan leans into sophistry. No, I don't think all the time. I think he's genuinely a thought pretzely curious guy, asking. Yeah, so I think Jordan's a really interesting case study when it comes to communication of ideas, and the interlocution we've seen him engage with over the years, including on our stage.
Yes. You ready?
Yeah.
I'm just playing. Okay. So let's go meta again. Let's go back to evolution. So in my systems, I define communication. Communication is not an optional layer added on to human cognition. It is cognition operating between organisms for survival, thriving, flourishing, and well-being. So basically on the planes, before beliefs, before theories, before identity, before ideologies, there was language and coordination. Even though, not belief, there was coordination in general. So, when we were on the planes and existing there, communication was, who warns who else about danger? Who signals danger? Who soothes the other person when they're in pain or when they're dealing with terror or horror or whatever.
Almost entirely negative consequentialism
Yeah.
in the calculus that's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So who's trusted, who is excluded, who repairs after rupture, who won't repair after a rupture of disagreement.
Mating.
That all determined who survived in the past.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it did. And so we can't just treat communication as like a two thing. Like, you can lens it in so many different ways, but just treating it as information transfer by itself is just too thin and silly. Just persuasion by itself is too adversarial, like you said. Just self-expression by itself is too inward, and social performance is just too shallow. So it's basically a survival grade coordination system for meaning, trust, action, and repair. And this is why communication this is why communication failures feel existential. They aren't just misunderstandings. They register in our nervous systems as threats to like coherence and belonging within our attachment, like the very base of us.
Yes.
Because it's for survival.
And like think of the frustration too, whether we're talking in early Neolithic times, or if we're talking in today's contemporary world, the frustration involved with being misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the cancers right now. Everyone feeling misunderstood.
Right.
And it literally creates an entire, like a low-grade fear of abandonment in the entirety of America. It really does. If you map attachment theory onto like social patterns and stuff, it totally does. Like everyone is terrified of being left alone because of, media and everything else, the way that everything has been enculturated into us socially.
Yeah. And when cooperation ends, it's just a breeding ground for this performative theatrical thing that is some kind of degenerately related to a good faith, helpful interaction, but it's more of a personal artistic endeavor takes flight, where you get into this like Aristotelian, using rhetoric to convince people, seeing people as kind of means to an end with regard to how you use communication. So transactional is what a lot of people fall into, because we're enculturated to do that. Right.
Because don't talk about your emotions, don't share, don't try to repair disagreements, just burn your bridge, shit like that.
Yeah. Well. Go ahead, Perry.
Real quick, in book 3 or 4, one of the boys asks Socrates, "Do you really want to persuade us, or do you just want to seem to persuade us?" And I think that question there is the true determining factor of whether you're trying to have a proper dialectic,
right,
or you're just trying to be, a sophist and try and convince me. You have to intend and try to understand the other person. That's what it means to be cooperative.
Right.
If you don't even try to do it, then it's going to be performative. It's going to be asymmetrical. I don't want to name any names, but we had a good friend who isn't in the server anymore. And, I'd really tried my little heart out for about a month or two to help him help us understand with what he was saying. And at the end of it all, I think it may have just been performative kind of thing. Right. Not to say he wasn't genuine, but you can't just go word cornucopia and hope and throw shit at the wall and hope it sticks. I mean, you have to try to work and cooperate with your interlocutors.
Yeah. I really like the Plato example too, because this just speaks directly to the Pangburn maxim, the good faith element. you stop the dialectic, you'd be like, oh, wait a second. What are you actually trying to do here? Because it's my interpretation of this is that we are interlocked in a cooperative engagement, trying to discuss the truthfulness of a proposition, let's say. But something has signaled, are you trying to convince anyone? Like, are you actually invested in this, or are you doing something else? Like, you're asking them, please tell me so I can understand your sincere intentions. If you don't have those sincere intentions worked out, I think the chances of bearing fruit in a dialectic are very, very low. And that's just one part of what the maxim demands. But I really like that example. It's a early example.
Will we be going back? Will we be talking about the dialectic?
Oh yeah, this entire time.
Okay.
Yes. But first, let's examine, and we can get into the dialectic in this section. Let's examine the Pangburn communication maxim, which is, good faith and helpfulness are the minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic. So my argument is exactly that. This is the constraint. The constraint being, I need to know that you have sincere intentions, and I need to see that you are attempting to be helpful in the conversation. If I don't have either of those, I don't think a fruitful dialectic can be born. Something that I would call fruitful. It doesn't mean that if those things aren't in line, that something spectacular can't happen, or that that you can't do some good. Because I've spent time talking to people who are bad faith and unhelpful, and I spend time talking to them, but I still feel as though some good came out of it. But the good that came out of it, I wouldn't say was fruitful dialectic. It could have been good, like they told me at the end of it that, I know I'm difficult, but tonight this really cured my loneliness, even though they were bad faith and unhelpful by my standard. So you can still do good by the standard of, say, your moral quest to maximize well-being for yourself and those around you. But I wouldn't call that exchange I had with this bad faith, unhelpful person a fruitful dialectic. So, a little bit of reading. The Pangburn communication maxim is intentionally minimal. It does not demand brilliance, politeness, or agreement. It does not require emotional warmth or ideological alignment. It requires only that participants show up with good faith and helpfulness, and it insists that without these, communication ceases to be dialectical at all. Good faith is the intention to act with honesty, sincerity, and integrity in interactions, decisions, and commitments. To act in good faith is to mean what one says, to avoid deliberate misrepresentation, and to refrain from strategic manipulation disguised as conversation. Strong disagreement is compatible with good faith. Dishonesty is not. Helpfulness is the quality of being willing and able to assist others in a way that improves their situation, resolves challenges, or assists them in achieving their goals. Helpfulness is therefore outcome-oriented. It asks not whether a contribution feels satisfying to the speaker, but whether it actually does something constructive for the conversation or the people in it. A statement can be true and still unhelpful. It can be clever and still coercive. It can be sincere and still destructive. Helpfulness introduces a moral filter that truth alone does not provide. It requires attention to context, timing, proportionality, and foreseeable impact. Together, good faith and helpfulness define the minimum conditions under which communication remains a cooperative enterprise rather than a covert contest. Good faith without helpfulness produces sincerity without care. Helpfulness without good faith produces assistance without integrity. Either alone is simply insufficient. Together, they establish the floor for the fruitful dialectic. This framing matters because most communicative breakdown does not announce itself as bad faith or malice. It hides behind plausibility. People claim honesty while omitting relevant context. They claim engagement while refusing to update. They claim truth while ignoring the predictable effects of how truth is delivered. The Pangburn maxim cuts through this ambiguity by evaluating communication according to posture and consequence rather than stated intent. A common objection is that helpfulness is subjective. Helpful to whom? Helpful by whose standards? The Pangburn response is fallibilist and pragmatic. These judgments are contestable and revisable, but they are not arbitrary. Over time, patterns reveal themselves. Conversations either clarify or degrade. People either feel more capable or less. Problems either move toward resolution or become more entrenched. Something about this that I will say as an aside to move away from the reading for a second is that I want to be able to have good faith, helpful dialectics with people who don't share my same moral framework. So within the confines of the dialectic, I'm going to have to sometimes negotiate what I think can be considered helpful or not within the context of that communication. And this is going to be different for basically everyone you talk to. You're going to have this dance happening from a helpfulness perspective of like, what kind of humor are they okay with? What kind of things do they say that really make you feel like they're being unhelpful in the conversation? All of this can be addressed and considered between the two of you. If you need to stop the dialectic and say, okay, well, this thing you keep doing seems unhelpful to me. I really don't like that. And then if they say, well, I can't negotiate that with you. You got to either take it or leave it. Then you make the decision. Is this person able to really meet my requirements for good faith and helpfulness? So helpfulness by design is not stringent. It is a way of being that manifests in as many ways as there are people on this planet. And that a lot of that is true about how communication is going to go, how your body is feeling that day and how your body language is coming off of you and vice versa. And how you're using words that day, how sharp your tone is, some things that Perry brought up about tonality. So I just wanted to point that out, that helpfulness is it's this seemingly infinite list of different occurrences and emergences that can show up in so many different ways, but you should at least be aware of the helpfulness by your own standards that you're bringing to the table, and be cognizant of the fact that someone else might have different ideas of what that looks like too, and try to cohabitate, try to coexist in that with them, because that in and of itself is a helpful effort for social beings. Okay, let's finish the reading and then we'll get into it, because this is a very important section dealing with the maxim. Another objection is that the maxim invites tone policing or suppresses difficult truths. This misunderstands its function. The maxim does not protect comfort. It protects function. Hard truths can still be helpful. Gentle words can still be harmful. What matters is whether the contribution improves the situation it enters. The Pangburn communication maxim does not regulate speech by content. It regulates it by responsibility. It asks communicators to take ownership of how their participation shapes the shared environment of understanding. Good faith and helpfulness are not aspirational virtues reserved for ideal conversations. They are minimum requirements, precisely because conversations are often tense, asymmetrical, and consequential. Okay, guys, there's a lot to go through there. Let's dive into the maxim, and let's also try to get into some of these common examples we find here in the community, you know, being so often tied into different conversations. And we can even talk about some conversations we've witnessed and different things, or some public figures who might struggle with good faith and helpfulness. And I have some examples to offer, but first on the maxim, good faith and helpfulness are the minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic. Go ahead.
Here you are especially, what is it, not required? You're the best one to speak about this, seriously, so go ahead. Hello?
We might have lost Perry.
Might have lost Perry. Okay. Good
Perry.
faith and helpfulness. And,
Yeah, go ahead. Are we back, Perry?
I was talking to a ghost. My Bluetooth was doing its thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What you want me to give, like, an example?
We're talking about the
Yeah.
maxim. So wherever you want to go.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. You said it nicely. You know, it's a dance. It's not an organized march. Good faith and helpfulness. It allows for a not so rigid and a not so strict way of communicating. You know, a lot of people will have. Take me and Don, for example. You know, maybe we'll get into more heated type of discussions. I can't remember the last one we had exactly, but that sort of conversation isn't going to fly with other types of, you know, interlocutors that you may have. But whatever range of interpreted, you know, not heated, that may seem unhelpful, but as long as you remain within those two guidelines of good faith and helpfulness, you know, you're bound to have a productive conversation. In fact, I think, to smuggle a bit, if you don't mind, I always talk about stage one enthusiasm. What does that mean? It means that you don't really progress in the conversation, right? If you are good faith and helpful in the discussion, meaning as an outcome you are helpful and you intend to be sincere with your with what you're saying, you, I believe, necessarily will avoid stage one enthusiasm. You will avoid being in an impasse, and you will have to progress in the conversation, even if there's disagreement. Disagreement doesn't mean that there's an impasse. It is progress, in fact, and being able to, understand the disagreement that you have with each other in a helpful way will, I believe, almost always lead to. So I think that maxim is fine and dandy, and it helps alleviate a lot of dialectical tensions that we often see. So yeah.
And thanks, Perry. Can you explain for a bit, for the record, what you mean by stage one enthusiasm?
Sure, I'd love to. Stage one enthusiasm it doesn't have to be intentional. It can just be outcome-based. You find yourself looping in a conversation. You're, for whatever reason, because you guys don't agree on a definition, because one person is not hearing the other person through, constant interruption, or someone is just being a rhetorician and it's not even really a discussion, you'll find yourself kind of in the preliminary stages of a conversation. You'll never cultivate new synthesized ideas with your interlocutor. It will kind of remain at this quote-unquote stage one. You'll never progress. You'll never revise your ideas, as you were saying, is important. So, I wrote a huge thing a year and a half ago in the writing tab, but I think, more or less, it's pretty self-explanatory. There's an impasse in the conversation for whatever reason. People, or your interlocutor or you won't engage with the other, and, it becomes a shouting match, or it just collapses into silence. And so I think that this good faith and helpfulness does prevent this. If you are being sincere in your intentions, and as an outcome, you are being helpful in agreement or disagreement, you will necessarily progress in the conversation, I believe.
Yeah, I think so too. Thomas?
Oh, so entirely agreed with P-Dog on all of that. Let's flip it. Let's look at the opposite of what good faith and helpful is. Let's look at dominance and obfuscation, the absolute enemies of a good faith and helpful dialectic. If you are attempting to dominate, and that's one of the main ones, even if you don't think you are sometimes, you may still be trying to do it with somebody you're interlocking with. You have to be metacognizant of this and be like, am I attempting to win? Am I trying to signal status here? Am I trying to punish this person's error? Am I trying to escalate the conversation? Am I trying to collapse the nuance here and just like attack? This all freezes identity in conversation, and so all it does is activates, shame and guilt in everybody, defensiveness, over moralization, rigidity, and eventually disengagement, because everybody's going to say, if I'm wrong, I lose. You know what I mean? And that's a huge issue, and that's what good faith and helpfulness attempts to not to outlast, if you will. That's a good way of putting it, because it is about endurance in the dialectic. There's going to be a lot of trial and error. This is why we can't expect each other to be perfect. And a lot of people want the other interlocutor to already understand exactly what they mean, read their mind, and all this other shit, right? They have all these preconceived notions of this person should know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, right. Everyone uses their own slightly different language. And so what I want in good faith and helpful is, an aim for teamwork coordination, so that we both have dignity. We can both allow errors with each other. There's no threat escalation on either side for either nervous system. We can expand the nuance and the synthesis and the creativity. and our identities stay flexible in between that. We can be wrong together, and it's still safe to be in this conversation. I don't have to disengage.
Yeah, and that all sounds helpful to me, and I assume you would want it to be grounded in in sincerity, in that you want to be interlocuting with sincere partners.
Yes, that is the foundation of the dialectic: is sincerity, genuinity, curiosity.
Yeah.
These things allow us to explore someone else's ideas, identity, everything, societies, not just the other person we're speaking to. This synthesizes all the way up.
I think it was brilliant that you opened with domination and obfuscation, because
those are the two big.
We see this all the time in the debate world, in the Discord, online dialectic world, where someone who might have a very high level education might come into a conversation seemingly to dominate the conversation, and also by use of their high education might try to steer or confuse the conversation by obfuscation, in ways of using language that would deter people from asking the fundamental, maybe grounding questions, or even getting into the more complex questions. But that domination element kind of steers the interlocutor or minimizes them into a position where it's really no longer a dialectic. It's the domination element has changed it.
Yeah. And then it just becomes coercion to indoctrination, and that is unhelpful and foolish, in my opinion. I don't metaphorically and literally, synthetically look at communication in itself philosophically as music and sound. Do I want atonal dissonance or do I want melody? I mean, it just really depends, right? For us to seek better well-being, good faith, helpfulness, genuineness, curiosity, sincerity with intentions, all of this is necessary for us to seek higher well-being. I mean, we can show the evidence after evidence through evolution that this is necessary for us to survive.
Yes. Like this is not a voluntary enterprise. This is what we are. You are communicative. Even if you're by yourself, you just are.
Yes.
So
amazing. Yeah.
I think it's really important for us to put constraints on particular aspects of our fundamental nature. It's a really good way to make sure we are starting from and maintaining the proper architecture. And that's what the first two chapters and this chapter is all about, putting on another constraint.
Even Helen Keller was communicative.
Yes. Mm-hmm. True that.
Actually, I've said this in the past to you guys, and I know you remember this. You could have a 10 trillion IQ, and without language, body language, spoken language, math, music, I don't know what's happening. So It is integral.
Yeah. If there isn't some way to communicate the intelligence quotient and what it produces, where is it? Well, it's stuck in the mind. I don't know. And I mean, there is, if the mind is functioning at that level, surely there is an internal communication. But it's Well, okay, let's move on to our taxonomic clarification. So throughout these chapters, you're going to notice that we're nailing, because these are extractions from the chapters in a way that is organized to best help people understand what the chapters are going to be about. And these aren't the prose in the right order from the book, but they are some prose handpicked for the purposes of these sessions. So I just wanted to make that clear. But yeah, we always need to go through the taxonomic clarification of communication so that it doesn't, the category error doesn't boggle it all up, because that's something that happens frequently in philosophy. Is I hear it all the time. It's just category error is getting in the way of a conversation bearing fruit, or someone's working, putting a lot of work into what they think is their great work, and really they've right off the bat have committed a category error and have essentially wasted time working on a concept in a category where it is never used, let's say in an academic fashion. So that's what we try to clean up in the taxonomic clarifications here. So where communication lives categorically in philosophy, communication is often treated as something much thinner than it is. In philosophy, it is frequently reduced to speech acts, propositions, or rules of argument. In public life, it is treated as expression, persuasion, or influence. These reductions are not false, but they are incomplete. And when they are mistaken for the whole, communication becomes deeply distorted. Pangburn philosophy begins by clarifying the category. Communication is not merely linguistic. It is not merely epistemic. It is not merely moral. It is a relational practice that operates at the intersection of all three. Let's remember that. Relational practice. That doesn't exclude the relational practice internally with yourself. But relational practice is very important to remember here. So one more time in this tiny little section. Pangburn philosophy begins by clarifying the category. Communication is not merely linguistic. It is not merely epistemic, and it is not merely moral. It is a relational practice that operates at the intersection of all three. This immediately distinguishes Pangburnian communication from theories that treat speech as value-neutral transmission. Words do not simply convey information. They alter incentives, shape trust, and condition future interaction. Communication, therefore, cannot be evaluated solely by truth conditions or formal validity. A perfectly valid argument can still degrade the conversational environment in which it appears. Again, a perfectly valid argument can still degrade the conversational environment in which it appears. It also distinguishes Pangburnian communication from purely expressive models. Expression prioritizes authenticity. Communication prioritizes intelligibility and consequence. Expression asks whether the speaker feels represented. Communication asks whether understanding has increased. The former centers the self, the latter centers the shared space between people. Nor is Pangburnian communication reducible to persuasion. Persuasion treats disagreement as a problem to overcome. Pangburnian communication treats disagreement as a signal that joint clarification is needed. When persuasion becomes the dominant frame, helpfulness collapses into strategy and good faith collapses into optics. One more time. When persuasion becomes the dominant frame, helpfulness collapses into strategy and good faith collapses into optics. So categorically then, communication in the Pangburn framework functions as a normative constraint on discourse. And again, fallibilism, being the epistemic constraint, the necessary epistemic constraint, well-being being the necessary ethical constraint, and now we have communication in the Pangburn framework being the normative constraint on discourse. Not a content governing rule. So a lot of the time, people will see helpfulness and they'll think that, oh, that means that I can't talk about my racist idea I have that I actually subscribe to because racism is unhelpful. No, that's not what it is. These are dialectical constraints, discourse constraints. It would be a category error for someone to come up to us, the admins in the Pangburn Discord, and say, this person is talking about how much they love Donald Trump, and I think that is deeply unhelpful. Category error. So it is not a content governing rule. It does not specify which views may be expressed. It specifies how participation must be conducted in the exchange, if the exchange is to remain dialectical rather than degenerative. This is why Pangburnian communication cannot be collapsed into free speech debates. Free speech concerns permission. Communication concerns responsibility. One can have the right to speak while still violating the minimum conditions for fruitful dialogue. Permission answers whether speech may occur. Communication ethics evaluates what the speech does once it does occur. This taxonomic placement also explains why Pangburnian communication resists ideological capture, because it is constraint-based rather than outcome-based. It cannot be monopolized by any political, religious, or cultural faction. It binds all participants to the same minimum standards of honesty, sincerity, integrity, and constructive orientation, regardless of belief. I'll talk about that in a second. Communication on this view is not a virtue one possesses. It is a practice one sustains. It lives neither in intention alone nor in effect alone, but in the relationship between the two over time. When good faith and helpfulness are present, disagreement can sharpen understanding. When they are absent, even agreement becomes hollow. This is where Pangburnian communication lives categorically, not as expression, not as persuasion, but as stewardship of shared understanding under constraint. Something quickly about this particular section. It cannot be monopolized by any political, religious, or cultural faction. It binds all participants to the same minimum standards of honesty, sincerity, integrity, and constructive orientation, regardless of belief. When we get into the final chapter, this is where I show the uniting force of the virtues and maxims by giving real-world examples. How the Christian purpose is best served by engaging in good faith, in a good faith, helpful way. Same as the Muslim purpose, the Hindu purpose, the atheist purpose, the woman's purpose, the man's purpose, the husband's purpose, the wife's purpose, the father's purpose, the mother's purpose. Okay, so let's talk about the taxonomic clarification. Does that make sense, Thomas and Perry? Where the maxim and the virtue, where this sits, does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'll ask a clarifying question. Communication is a virtue for you. Yeah. But you also said that it's a practice.
Yeah.
So how would you delineate? Well, instead of thinking, I'll just ask you the question. How would you distinguish between when it becomes a virtue and when it's a practice?
Well, I think virtues ought to be practiced. Virtues ought to have praxis. So communication itself as a virtue, to remind yourself to that you are communicative and you ought to be communicative, should be a daily practice, just like the rest of the Pangburn virtues and maxims.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we will get into the praxis chapter eventually, and what this looks like in praxis. But we start getting into this phenomena that we see all the time. It's apparent in everyone's life, where just their lack of ability to cross this false blockade of just communicating. And how many of our interpersonal struggles, work struggles, just stepping into that communication zone, armored with this maxim. It's just sometimes we don't communicate when we should, just like how we don't remind ourselves to be fallibilistic when we should, or remind ourselves that at least ethically our physical, mental, and social health matters. So does that answer your question, Perry?
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine I read into it too much, and I also maybe could have misheard you. I thought you said that it's not a virtue, it's a practice, but you may have been talking specifically about maybe like the relational part of things or whatever subcategory. But yeah, no, I mean, also
I want to see where that might have been,
yeah,
because that's important for me to catch if I did. In fact,
sure. Yeah, no, I mean, we can go back in the tape later on, but practicing my fallibilism, it just as easily could have been me mishearing it. And also, when we get to the praxis part, like you said, I'm sure whatever cobwebs I have, if any, will be put away. So.
Yeah, and yeah, and I make all kinds of mistakes when I'm writing too, and reading. So
yeah, no worries. We'll look at it later.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it. But I see what we're saying here. Yeah, I need to make that more concrete. It's not well written. Communication on this view is not a virtue one possesses. It is a practice one sustains. So it's a bad use. I'm going to mark this. Where's my tool? Text color red. Yeah, no, this is great. And this is part of the reason we're going through this process. Thank you for flagging that.
I was literally going to say, thusly, communication and good faith and helpfulness itself between you two, just there. This is what interdependent teamwork is about in a dialectic.
Yeah.
If you're not there for teamwork and understanding together and trying to find the truth together, it's a waste of time. It truly is, and it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
What Perry said is definitely okay.
So like, I wouldn't say, everyone knows you shouldn't be calling other people the R word, but oh, you're an idiot. Like, how can you mess that up? Like, are you kidding me? Like, have you even taken philosophy? Like, that's.
Right. Well, we also, Perry's touching on something really good here. We should, if that happens, like if I'm like, Perry, you're an idiot. Like Perry and me know it doesn't matter. Like he can call me an idiot, it doesn't matter, right? But some people don't understand that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And that's a big thing to remember, is that we need to allow each other to joke and make mistakes and be fallible and be fragile, frankly. I mean, like, you know, if we want to seek the truth together, a bit of vulnerability is required, because trust is required, and that's how you build trust. Vulnerability.
No, just like we were saying earlier, we have our own. There's as many like ways of communicating in good faith and helpfulness as there are people, like Travis said. So I have a relationship with Thomas. You know, I call him the F word, jokingly and in love, but you know, I can't do that to a stranger, right? So, yeah.
So, great. So I made a quick update here. So it was just a couple words missing from what I was trying to get. So communication on this view is not a virtue one simply possesses internally. It is a practice one sustains. So it's leading into it's a reminder about the praxis. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. Okay. Thomas, did you have any more info or anything to add on taxonomy? Or
I mean, good Lord, bro. You want to sit here and talk for 3 hours? No, seriously, you're covering it so well, and I mean, we are being rigorous, but this is general enough to understand for anybody to latch onto if they don't want to go and take 10 years to look all this stuff. That doesn't matter, right? It's about understanding the principles, and I think you're doing a great job. So keep going.
Great. Yeah, I just want to make sure. I mean, it seems obvious that, like, you know, based on the real world example I gave about how someone would say, you know, well, you say you're trying to promote good faith and helpfulness, and someone posted about how they think Hitler did a good job in this particular area. I find that to be very unhelpful for them to say, so you should penalize them. That's a category error of where this constraint lives. It's a dialectical constraint. So we're gonna do one more section today, and then we'll be halfway through this chapter. And like we did in session 1 for well-being, we finished with a brief history. So we will talk a brief history of communication in philosophical thought. And for anyone that's in the room, we are recording this for the YouTube channel, but if you feel like you have a question or something important you think needs to be said, feel free to raise your hand, and we might take a couple callers. So, a brief history of communication in philosophical thought. Philosophy has always depended on communication, but it has rarely treated communication itself as a primary object of moral concern. For much of its history, communication was assumed to be a transparent medium through which truth could pass, rather than a fragile practice requiring its own constraints. In ancient Greek philosophy, dialogue was central but largely idealized. Plato's dialogues portray conversation as a rational assent guided by shared commitment to truth and disciplined by reason. Breakdown appears mainly as ignorance or sophistry. The deeper psychological and social forces that distort real-world communication remain mostly in the background. Aristotle brought greater realism by attending to rhetoric. He recognized that persuasion depends not only on logic, but on character and emotion. Yet rhetoric was treated instrumentally as a tool for influence, not as a shared ethical practice. The focus remained on effectiveness rather than responsibility. Medieval philosophy largely subordinated communication to authority. Truth was transmitted through scripture, doctrine, and institutional hierarchy. Communication functioned vertically rather than dialogically. Questioning was permitted only within tightly constrained boundaries, and helpfulness was defined by conformity rather than clarity. Modern philosophy inherited a different distortion. Enlightenment thinkers emphasized reason, argument, and universality. Communication was assumed to succeed whenever propositions were clear and logically valid. Disagreement was treated as error rather than as an expected feature of pluralistic societies. Emotional regulation, power asymmetry, and identity threat were again sidelined. 20th century philosophy began to correct this. Speech act theory revealed that language does not merely describe reality, but performs actions. Social epistemology emphasized testimony, trust, and dependence. Pragmatism reframed meaning as use rather than correspondence alone. These developments exposed communication as an active, world-shaping practice. Yet even here, a gap remained. Communication was analyzed descriptively rather than normatively. Philosophers explained how communication works without fully addressing how it fails, how it harms, or how it should be constrained to protect inquiry and community. Pangburnian communication enters at this point of failure. It does not reject earlier insights. It integrates them under a single normative demand. Communication must remain capable of producing understanding rather than damage. This requires more than clarity or sincerity. It requires good faith and helpfulness as enforceable minima. Historically, the absence of such constraints has produced predictable patterns. Debate cultures that reward cleverness over care become adversarial. Institutions that elevate authority over dialogue become brittle. Environments that confuse expression with contribution become noisy but uninformative. The lesson is not that philosophy misunderstood communication. It is that philosophy underestimated it. Communication is not merely how ideas move, it is how social reality is stabilized or destabilized. The Pangburn communication maxim is therefore not a break from philosophical tradition, it is a correction to its blind spots. It names explicitly what history left implicit. That without ethical constraints on how we speak, reason alone is not enough to keep us talking productively. Okay, Thomas and Perry, the treatment here on the history of communication and philosophical thought.
Oh, I could go forever. I want to tag off Perry. I love this.
Yeah, as you guys probably know by now, the reason why Plato is one of my favorite philosophers is not because I agree with him on everything, though I do agree with him on quite a bit morally, but because I'm able to synthesize and correct and critique him quite a bit. He's a huge canvas for me to critique. And, so one of the things that I do love about him is the Socratic method, of course. But what he fails to implement is those constraints that we've been talking about with all three of these virtues. We can't idealize everything. We have to remain in our praxis, in our fallibility. And so that's really all I have to say on history. I do want to say one thing on a couple sections ago. Your trifecta between it's not merely linguistic, it's not merely epistemic, and it's not merely moral. It's all three of those things.
Yes.
Correct me if my paraphrase isn't sufficient. But
correct. Yeah.
The moral part I find very underrated when it comes to communication.
Yes.
I think that there's a huge normative aspect on how we should be using language. Should we be using words as homonyms and obfuscate? And should we be yelling or, letting our emotions get the best of us as so far as we have control over them? So,
yeah. This is great. You can't escape the normative qualities of communication and what it really means in practice. And of course, you all must know at this point, my answer is going to be, we ought communicate in ways that maximize well-being for ourselves and those around us. And by well-being, I mean physical, mental, and social health. So the question is,
indeed,
am I communicating badly to my children? Well, that depends. What is the effect on their physical, mental, and social health? If you are having a good effect, let's say because we know a lot of this, right? Like we know a lot about child psychology and cognitive development. We know so much now. And so long as we are presupposing the correct moral frameworks, the right moral metrics, then we should be able to be good in this world. And it's interesting that you brought up Plato and you talk about his idealizations. The question is, why is he here as a brilliant thinker? How much of it is because he was simply ignorant to so many of the facts about reality that we know today that allow us to build constraints that are grounded in our biological beings? And how closely would he agree with, let's say me, on where I've landed ethically and with regards to this dialectical constraint? I would imagine that he wouldn't deny the facts about our well-being, and I imagine he would not deny that good faith and helpfulness seem to be good constraints when considering the well-being of subjects.
I know for an absolute certain fact that Plato would not deny your thoughts on well-being, obviously joking, but I either said this last week on well-being or I said this to you in private, but his idea of justice is more or less what we would call well-being, whether he'd understand the social, mental, and physical delineations between it. I don't know, but it's as close as you're going to get 2,500 years ago.
Also, like Aristotelian, these ideas that emerge throughout philosophical history of living in accordance with nature. We hear this from Marcus Aurelius as well. That very much means to them, in my understanding, that something very much in tune with maximizing well-being. Our nature, to live in tune with it, would be to recognize those things about our nature that are bare minimum ethical constraints or ought be constraints, and listen to those and live in accordance with them. I really think there is a well-being tie there, and I think when I think of Marcus Aurelius and his meditations as well, I really think he would be living as a moral well-beingist as well. Thomas, thoughts on history? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh man. Yeah, no, you're good. If you're going to ask me about history, I'm going to go all the way back to the meta, baby. We're going to go back to evolution again. And that's you know, a lot of this in terms of communication. If you look into evolutionary psychology and just evolution in general, if you know the biology of it, you know, when we were on the plains, we didn't, you know, we didn't survive. So early humans didn't survive because they were the strongest or fastest or individually and most individually intelligent. They survived because they could, you know, coordinate attention, share threat models with each other. Like, hey, this is what's going to happen when this bad thing happens. You know, stuff like that. Repair conflict without permanent fracture to the tribe and the whole, and maintain that trust under all of that stress. So, you know, language and communication was gesture, then vocalization, then symbol, then narrative. So, you know, the communication has always been there. And you mentioned a second ago, I'd like to jump back really quickly to dominance and obfuscation. And when I said a minute ago, like when so it's two nervous systems interacting through language. That's, if you want to get down to the brass tacks of it, that's what's happening. We are our CNS, our central nervous system, brain, nervous system, peripheral nerves, everything. We are all of it, our cells, everything, you know, mind, all of it. Anyway, I said earlier, we can be wrong together and still be nervous system safe. That is what our body is doing when we're talking to somebody else. And you said something about families earlier, right? What did you say about families?
Well, I was talking about how in the previous section how you know, how is our communication affecting the well-being of our families, you know, our
Yes.
brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, sons,
Yes.
daughters, you know. Yeah.
Yes, and that one sentence explains the problem. They say we can't be wrong together and still be safe. And that's the issue. Everybody feels unsettled nervous system wise, if you think about it that way, and that is what modern science thinks about it. So I mean, that one sentence explains we can't, not we can be wrong, but we can't be wrong together and still be safe nervous system wise. This is what your body is doing unconsciously, telling you this basically while you're talking to somebody else in a conversation or the dialectic, however deeply it goes.
Right.
And you know, this distinction, that one sentence explains why online discourse is so broken. Discord, media, YouTube, all of it. Why families fracture, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know, all that kind of stuff, and it goes out to ordinary conversation every day to day. It just goes between. I mean, I don't know. Pick a random example. I mean, of an everyday communication. How's your day? Hey, how's your day going? You know what I mean? And you know, this is all stuff like, you know, basically we're checking safety. We're reaffirming social bonds. We're synchronizing reality together. Hey, you're here. I'm here. We're here. You know, and you're reinforcing your own identity within the social network. And so when you say, hey, how was your day? It's not trivial, right? You're basically saying in your nervous system and your unconscious and, you know, together, it's all synthesized together. You're basically saying, are you okay? Am I here? Are we still us? Are we aligned? You know, do you know what I'm saying to you?
Yeah. What are we really saying when we exchange in these social memes? What are we
and
really saying?
when good faith and helpful communication is healthy, the humor flows. People aren't persecuted for their errors. There's, you know, not, obviously if it gets ridiculous, moderation, right? Silence is safe, like pauses and things like that don't make you hypervigilant. So, what is this person thinking about me? Should I dominate? Should I obfuscate? Should I do something to protect my identity? And, you know, disagreement becomes tolerable. It does, because once you're trying to understand each other and you're not attempting to be right about the disagreement, the way that you disagreed, you're trying to be accurate to reality as best you can together. Yeah. You know, and so that's why, and then when all of that happens, guys, our effective neurodynamics of like all these different circuits. If you want to look it up, his name is Panksepp, and it's like I can't remember the title of it. It's the 7 roles of the effective brain structure, something like that. It doesn't matter. Go look up Panksepp. Yeah. He's really awesome.
So when you
And basically,
Yeah, go
whenever
ahead.
it's super healthy, really quick, I'll be done in 2 seconds. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Whenever those things come, whenever the disagreement is tolerable, the silence is safe, the humor flows, we're not forced to be perfect or hyper vigilant of what the other person thinks. Play and curiosity and safety and epistemic seeking emerge. That emerges naturally. So yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of what you said here, thanks, Thomas, is going to lead us into, and we'll save it for next week, but into cognitive and social constraints on communication. So we'll start with cognition at the, and we'll talk about our biological histories and some of the evolutionary things you've brought up. So yes, thank you for that. So we are going to stop with that section here today, but I see we have Brett in the room. Brett raised his hand. So Brett, what do you have for us? Do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, maybe a comment / wanting to know your guys' perspective. Like the few things that Thomas was just talking about right now, right? Like there's something within the nervous system that says you have to be safe, even if you're unconsciously doing it. So there's the perceived, safety apparatus for the elders in the group who are trying to keep that. But it's also like the thing like Thomas ended with, where the paradox of, really, that creative flow or whatever else it is, on the other end, it is like letting go to a certain degree. Which may be part of why a lot of people have a hard time with that, is because letting go of something is, how close you're tied to it. And I don't know, I just found that an interesting paradox, that it's like in trying to get to the infinite, or in trying to get, to think of ideas, if you're trying to work on something, you have to to a certain degree, be open to learning, and that can be challenging. Yeah. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, that's great. Interesting insight. I think when we talk about learning, all learning is going to be entrenched in and happen within the purview of communication, and it's hard to be bad faith towards yourself, but I think we can be. So looking at how we're learning, what is our sincere reasons for researching or listening to a podcast or anything like that, and also being helpful to ourselves and to our teachers or those who we're learning with in that process is very important. And so today I want to leave everyone with, just don't forget how much good you can do in the world by simply focusing on your communication and how your communication is affecting your own well-being and those around you, those who are being affected by your communication, whether it's your posts on social media, whether it's jokes you're making, be conscientious of how this is affecting others and yourselves, because you are affected. You can't escape it. There is an effect, and there is an effect on others. Even if they say, oh, that doesn't affect me, there is an effect on others. So there's a lot of good to be done if you are communicating in a way that is truly seeking to maximize well-being, physical, mental, and social health for yourself and those around you. I want to thank Brett for the question or the comment. Thanks a lot. Thomas and Perry, as always, thank you guys so much for joining me. I loved this session, and I'm looking forward to session 2. Thank you, guys.
We love you.
Yes, thank you. Love you.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right, and thanks everyone who stopped by to listen. Feel free to drop any comments. We will read them here on Discord, or you can save your comment for when we drop this video on our YouTube channel. But thanks everyone, and as always, let art and science inspire.